this is Louise Brazier, who's actually an occupational therapist, and the title is Detentions Under the Mental Health Act, Can OTs Do That? And actually this is very interesting. So Louise will introduce herself and you'll say a little bit about your history as an AMP as well.
If you want me to, yeah.
Yes, please. I think we're all interested. We're always interested to hear other things that OTs actually get up to. So we're very proud that you're a fantastic AMP in County Council and you're an OT, and that's really exciting. So we look forward to hearing your presentation.
Okay. I'm mud on my way through it, particularly well rehearsed, but hey ho. It was. Definitely was, yeah. Okay, well, hello everybody. I'm Louise Brazier and I am an occupational therapist, but not pure in its sense, because I also have another role, which is that of an approved mental health professional. I am here today to present to you basically a bit of a talk about how I think the core skills of an occupational therapist can be transferred into that of being a good AMP, and I will explain what an AMP does. So the title is Detentions Under the Mental Health Act, Can Occupational Therapists Do That? And in a word, yes they can, and I'll sort of explain a bit more as we go. So I will click, there we go. So approved mental health professionals, or AMPs for short, we work on behalf of local authorities and are approved to carry out a variety of functions under the Mental Health Act, which was in its current format devised in 1983, so it's pretty ancient now. It's a statutory role, so it's governed by law. We're responsible for considering cases on behalf of the local authority that approve us. We then coordinate assessments of individuals who are being considered for detention under the Mental Health Act, and we arrange admissions to hospital thereafter if it's necessary and appropriate to do so. Detentions are colloquially known as sectioning, which is the familiar term that's bantered about to everybody. The role of applying for a section actually lies with the AMP and not a medical doctor. So a doctor may feel that a section is needed, but it is actually the AMP who will be the person who ultimately decides if this is required after they carry out their detailed assessment and consult with the medical doctors. So our role replaced that of the approved social worker. I don't know if any one of you would have heard of that term, that's quite old now. So back in 2007, the Mental Health Act was amended slightly and they introduced the role of the AMP to replace that of the approved social worker. This was in part to address the national shortage of ASWs, or approved social workers at the time, and encourage other professionals who are trained in mental disorder to have an opportunity to carry out the role. So I'm one of a very few OTs who are also trained as AMPs. I work, and my approving local authority is Kent County Council, so I work across the whole of the county, and we have a base in Sessions House in Maidstone and also at Brook House in Mistletoe, just down there. It's a very stressful and busy role. It involves shift work. You can imagine it's quite taxing, but I do find it really rewarding. I got my warrant in 2017. I'm due to re-warrant this week. So my portfolio is due in, which will be scrutinised, which is basically like a CPD thing, which evidences that you've done X amount of direct observations and reflective practices, and that you're up on the law as well, because obviously ultimately we're working within a legal framework called the Mental Health Act, and you have to understand the law. So yeah, at the end of the day, we're potentially depriving people of their freedom and their liberty. So all the decisions that we make are not done lightly, and we have to have additional training to go with that. So it is an additional qualification on top of your occupational therapy qualification that you might already have. It takes about an academic year to do that at a university that does that kind of training, and then there's an academic and practical placement that would be attached to Kent if you were going to work for Kent afterwards, for example. And Jane is my professional supervisor for occupational therapy, and yes, she did rope me into doing this today. It is those eyes. Okay, so next slide. Who can be one? So AMP's work is predominantly carried out by social workers. Only 5% of us are either mental health or learning disability nurses, OTs with mental disorder experience, or chartered psychologists. And I think there's literally about one in the country who might be a practicing psychologist. So despite the approved social worker role being introduced in 2007, only 5% of us are from the other eligible professions. So 95% of us are still social workers, which is a bit of a shame, really. We need more. Okay, so sorry, some statistics to bore you, but in England and Wales in 2005-2006, there were 43,400 mental health act detentions, compared to 2015-16, there were 63,600, so a 47% increase in just 10 years. And during that time, that same time period, AMPs were dwindling in numbers, you know, retirement, stress, lots of different reasons really why people don't stay in the role for a long time. Not that I'm trying to put you off at all. Okay. So OTs can be AMPs. So I want to talk to you about being an AMP, what it's like, and how I think and believe that the core professional skills of an OT help us to make really good AMPs. There's an interesting article written by a social worker called AMP Jack of all trades, hybrid professional roles within a mental health occupation. And it talks about the AMP role being seen as a hybrid profession. So hybrid being a thing made up of two or more elements combined, of mixed origin, working across several roles and areas of expertise within public services, and working in complex bureaucracies. So I'm assuming all of you can relate to that in some shape or form. So, oh, did I do something? I may have pressed the button, sorry, apologies. Next one, please. Thank you. So yeah, I'm not suggesting for a moment that any of you are horse gators, but I think you can kind of see the sort of hybrid link that I'm trying to make, that actually OTs also have a background from so many areas that is quite woolly. And earlier today I was listening to Sarah, saying how we still have big issues and hang-ups about defining our role and comparing ourselves to other professionals. And I think it's just because it is so vast and so big and we do so many things that it's hard to home in on exactly what we do, whereas somebody like a physio, it is so specific. Okay. So why we make good AMPs? Okay. So at a glance at these two roles, we wouldn't think that OTs could possibly have the skills that are required to do a legal role in mental health act detentions, but let's explore this. So AMPs, their overall responsibility is to coordinate an assessment and manage compulsory admission to a hospital if required when someone is in an acute mental health crisis. OTs, on the other hand, work with people of all ages and look at aspects of their daily life in home, schools, workplaces, and looking at the activities that we find hard to do to see if there's a different way, another way that people can do them. Have I done it again? Yeah. Do I go back? Oh, can you do that for me? No, hang on. That's not, no, that's the one I want. Right, assessment skills. Gosh, sorry, I apologise, I'm not the best at IT. So I've tried to home in a little bit on what I personally think OTs can bring into the world of AMPing. Of course, it's not an exhaustive list and there's lots of other opinions and ideas. Okay, but I think primarily occupational therapists have excellent assessment skills, keeping the service user at the heart of it all, being quick to build rapport and really finding out what someone wants and what they need. This slide illustrates beautifully the OT in collaboration with their service user at every step of the process. They're good at supporting and evaluating what's working and what's not, and keeping someone at the heart of all of the process throughout their journey. OTs have the utmost respect for people's social situations and physical environment around them. On the left here are the 5 key principles that must guide AMP practice under the law. These clearly illustrate that the AMPs are required to have that same intense level of involvement with their service users. So things like empowerment and involvement and respect and dignity, and having the least restrictive decision making. So we don't just put someone in hospital, it's really the last resort if there's no other options. So we're always thinking about maximising someone's independence and trying to keep them at home wherever possible. So some of these statements on this slide confirm this. So working in partnership seems to be a key factor across both professional roles. In Leah's article, Jack of All Trades, she challenges the beliefs of AMPs as just being seen as social controllers. By working with people and exploring their concerns and their struggles, it's sometimes possible to meet a shared plan that the service user is on board with, whether this is coming into hospital for an admission, maybe an informal admission, maybe they are able to agree to come in themselves and they don't need to be detained under the Mental Health Act after all. Or maybe having more intense treatment at home, perhaps with a crisis team, for instance. I'm assuming you've all had or heard of something to do with crisis teams before. Okay. And then on the right here, this very much looks at how OTs work really well and are very good at working in partnership. Okay. I hope it's a smaller screen than I was expecting, so I hope you can see it. So this slide demonstrates just how broadly OTs are required to think when considering a service user as the whole individual and taking into account areas of their functional abilities. So in OT, we think a lot about activities of daily living, work, leisure, social interactions, as well as the client's own values and beliefs, their performance skills, including emotional and physical, their routines and their life roles at that given time. The environment around them and whether this is supportive to them as well is really important. And all of that is taken into account by the OT. The AMP in comparison, I've selected some key AMP competencies which the Mental Health Act stipulates that we as AMPs have to take into account when determining if someone is competent to be an AMP. I've highlighted some of the key things, so social, physical, developmental, understanding and respecting qualities, diverse backgrounds, and having a good understanding of someone's level of function with regard to social background, occupation. It's really similar, similar stuff that they're also thinking about. I think they might have nicked it from us. Okay, so far you can see that OTs and AMPs really do need to approach individuals as whole entities and not as segments of, say, a bad leg or a deep depression or a dysfunctional family environment. This slide shows off perfectly the key areas of OT focus and what OTs need to consider. And I'm not trying to teach your granny to suck eggs here, but you can see, you know, we hold occupation as a focus, but within that we recognise that all of these factors like family life, health, engagement in community activities, all of that kind of thing has a massive impact on people's functioning and their daily life. Back to that slide. Okay, so as the heading states, seeing people in their own environments is invaluable. I think it's key, in my opinion. I always think of someone in a hospital setting or in a clinic, if I see them, as being a bit like seeing a wild animal in a zoo. You really only get half the picture sometimes of what's going on for that person. I think OTs and AMPs have the luxury, and often, maybe not so much nowadays, of seeing people in their own habitat, so to speak. And what we learn from this as a result is often invaluable and can support our decision making for people. Okay, so this quote here, I just wanted to read out to you, it comes from an article called AMP Work, Dirty or Prestigious, written by a social worker. So it's written from an AMP's perspective. The person's situation is what is distressing, not the detention itself. Detention in hospital is awful, but it allows respite from the negative impact on people's lives. The alternative may be coming to harm if left at home. So taking people away from their homes and depriving them of their liberty can be seen as the ultimate social control, but it can also be seen in a more positive light, as here. So professional curiosity, Sarah's talk earlier today spoke about this in a bit more depth. To be professionally nosy is really beneficial to people to see the whole picture. As an AMP, under a section called Section 13, we have the added responsibility of having to take into account the views and the perspectives of people's significant others, so their relatives and close friends. This can weigh heavily on outcomes of assessments, as you can imagine. Many service users expressly wish that we don't contact other people, often if they want to minimise their situations that they're in or paint a positive picture about themselves. So as AMPs, we have a duty to also strongly consider and balance the Human Rights Act, which so ultimately we are allowed to go against people's wishes sometimes in order to gather essential information from others. As it is important to see the situation from all angles, but this is taken on a case-by-case basis, because obviously there might be some people who really don't want you to contact certain relatives for very valid or serious reasons. I think OTs are really good at being curious and using themselves as a tool to facilitate change. And I think we are very professionally curious, so I think that's another core skill that we share. So all jokes aside, both OTs and AMPs take regular risks. Risk assessment is a massive thing as an AMP, but also as an OT. There's a lot at risk when you're looking at getting a wheelchair dependent person home from hospital for the first time, for example. So much can go wrong. So as AMPs, we are trained in risk taking. Obviously, this can often be a matter of life and death situations, but nevertheless, it is an essential part of our job. Excuse me. Weighing up the pros and the cons of every situation. And then we reflect and we adapt in real time, and I think that's another skill that we both professions hold. So in my opinion, I think that the OTs and AMPs are very good at problem solving and finding solutions to immediate problems. We think while we're on the job. So for example, can this person go home with additional support, or are the risks for them hurting themselves too great? If we arrange such and such to happen, will that make a difference? And I think we're good at that. Okay. So to recap, so far we've talked about some of the skills OTs have that can be transferred across into the work of being an AMP. Tina, who is an AMP, is quoted again from another article, and she says, "We slip into different roles all of the time. As an AMP, we wear different hats. We're the advocate, the caring person, the judge. I'm going to detain you, but I do also care about you." And I think that kind of captures really the varying roles of being an AMP, and also how that can actually be quite similar for an OT. We're assessing and we're supporting and we're educating and we're doing so many things. Okay. So I am going to waffle on with just 4 more points really of kind of the roles that I think we share, OTs and AMPs together. One of them is that of being an advocate. Okay, so AMPs have adopted and developed several roles over time. And I think that being an advocate is one of them. Annette, who's another AMP, she's quoted as saying, "I enjoy being the voice of people, those who have no voice or don't know how to articulate what they think or feel like they're being submerged by professionals. If we can't do that, we can't stand up for the people. Making it matter and bringing about change is really important." And as I've already briefly mentioned, I think we are both professions are keen at educating people. And I think that that's really important as well. So being an educator plays a massive part, from the smallest things such as teaching someone how to use a new aid safely, to talking to relatives about how a disease may progress over time and what they should expect for the future. And I think that got mentioned earlier on about how doctors, swoop in and say, "You've got motor neuron disease, bye." And nobody actually goes through what might happen for that person, what those stages might be and what things to consider. And I think OTs are very good at doing that and picking up the pieces. So the third thing I think is another key role is that of being a mediator. Annette, an OT, she's quite a chatty OT, she's also said about being a mediator. Sometimes you soften the responses between organisations to make those bridges work better, because you know that you can get the Mexican standoff almost between some organisations, which is so key, isn't it? All the time we're hearing rules and regulations from one, but we have to try to learn to tweak them and adapt them to suit everybody's needs as best we can. And finally, the role of that of therapist. So these 2 people, Dawn and Kate, they're both AMPs. They're not OTs by background, but they've picked out the fact that they think being a therapist is an asset during the process of Mental Health Act assessments. So I will use my therapeutic skills to gain more information, to see if I can in any way work on whatever their issues are, such as advice or signposting. And Kate says, "I think you can have a therapeutic effect using a therapeutic rapport, the way that we communicate with people, some of the approaches we might use to help people to understand what's happening for them, allowing people to ventilate." I mean, you can imagine how angry people get when you're actually saying, "I'm sorry, but you've got to come to hospital and we're detaining you under the Mental Health Act and we'll call the police if you don't do that." We're depriving people of their liberty, taking them out of their own homes, and it's extremely scary. So by allowing people to ventilate, Kate has said, "I think we use CBT approaches and psychosocial interventions." So there's a sort of therapeutic hat there as well. Okay, I don't know if I've gone under or over time, but do you have any questions? I'm here to listen to you. Thank you all so very much for your time. I've not listed every shared skill, obviously, between the 2 professions. But I think I've given you a bit of a flavour of how the OT core skills can be really transferred into that of AMP work. And I'm happy to answer any questions either as an AMP in general or specifically within the Kent AMP service. I think there was a slide at the very end. No, it's okay, don't worry. I just wanted to show you because it's a contact at the very end. Our service manager, Helen Burns, she is contactable, and if anybody does express an interest in doing their training at any point in time, she's a good person to contact. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thanks very much.
Interesting, isn't it? It's just fascinating, absolutely fascinating. I completely agree with you. I think OTs have got all the skills they need in apps. It's just being bold enough to step up and do it. So
And I
I've got
think
any
we work
questions
really
or-
well as you know, I know predominantly the role is social work led, but they're a really nice bunch of people and
Did you
really
have a
professional.
career were you in mental health before? Was that
Yeah,
your OT mental
Yeah,
health?
you do need to have a sound knowledge of mental disorder really. I think they sort of specify around 2 years or to have condensed it somehow and evidencing it as well. Because if you apply, you have to do a portfolio pre-application that they look at before they even offer you an interview. So it's changed a bit since I did mine, but that's how it currently is. They're actively recruiting all the time, but they are quite selective because there's a massive fallout. People train and then they don't do the job long term. It's stressful, obviously, but there's lots of bad
Pros and
things
cons
to it.
Yeah.
So it's, many hurdles to get over to get there. But yeah, and we've just linked Louise up with the national framework for OTs who are AMPs in the country through the allied health professions. Again, another branch we just discovered. So it's so useful, this AHP link. It's been really, really good. So you kind of met up with them
I
once
have
already, haven't
a
you?
couple
So,
of times now,
yeah.
and one in particular emailed me recently, and yeah, so it is just nice to have
yeah.
someone to call on now and again if you ever wanted to. Yeah. There aren't many of us, but
I just had a quick question. Were there any virtual questions or no virtual ones? Right. Apart from a queer says that it'd be wonderful to see more OT apps. I think she's out recruiting.
yes, yeah. Well, she's my line manager as well. Yeah, but above Helen. Yeah.
I just wondered how the rest of the team see you as an OT. You know,
Actually, really positively. They're really lovely. There's no barriers at all between us, and I have to remind them now and again that I am a OT because I'm also a practice educator now for AMPs, but I can't be a practice educator for undergraduate social workers, obviously, because I'm not a social worker. But I did the same training that it is the same training in essence. But I'm only allowed, obviously, to have AMPs. So I have to remind them of that.
it's curious the barriers that are up. But anyway, brilliant. Okay, well, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks for having me.
No, that's very good. Thank you.